good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Cynthia Rodriguez, and I am an organizer with Mijente. Mijente is a political home and a national organizing hub for Latinx and Chicanx people. We are pro-Black, pro-queer, pro-immigrant, y más. And I am very excited to welcome you to our webinar today, where we will be breaking down our newest report, The Deadly Digital Border Wall. Our event is happening today in both English and Spanish. Muy buenas tardes, yo soy Cynthia Rodríguez, organizadora con Mijente, y estamos aquí hoy para hablar sobre nuestro nuevo reporte del muro fronterizo digital mortal. Tenemos interpretación en español. So, por favor, si necesitan interpretación, pueden escoger en el globo interpretación en español, y si tienen cualquier dificultad, por favor, de dejarnos saber en el chat. Muy buenas tardes. Aquí estamos y tenemos interpretación en español. Entonces, si necesitan interpretación, por favor, de hacer clic en el globo que tiene interpretación en español. Y si tienen cualquier dificultad, por favor de dejarnos saber en el chat. Okay, so to get started, welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. And if you haven't, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat by sharing your name and organization or community that you're throwing down with. Today, we will be discussing the Deadly Digital Wall, a new report about tech surveillance at the southwest border, brought to you by the Rio Grande Valley No Border Wall Coalition, Just Futures Law, and Mijente, with generous support from Voces Unidas RGV, Empower LLC, the Ida B. Wells Just Data Lab, and the Summer Immigration Institute of the Colorado College Department of Sociology. This afternoon, you will hear more about, one, the different kinds of surveillance tools that President Biden and the Department of Homeland Security are actively building and operating on the southwest border of the US. Two, you will learn more about how border communities are taking action and resisting digital border surveillance. And three, in just a minute, you will hear more about our larger campaign that for over 5 years has demanded no tech for ICE throughout the country. But first, we have—
I'm Siri.
But first, we
Pleased to
have
meet you.
two poll questions for you. In just a second, you should see a poll appear on your screen. Check them out. The poll is available in English and Spanish. The questions are: which of the following surveillance technologies have you heard about, and which are you most interested in learning more about? No worries if you haven't heard any of them. We just want to have an idea of what you're interested in. So results are coming in. So we're asking, which of the following surveillance technologies have you heard about, and which are you most interested in learning about? We're at 60% answered. Which of the following surveillance technologies have you heard about, and which are you most interested in learning about? And if I could please have Norma or Julie help me announce the results. I'm having trouble seeing the poll results. Awesome, so I have the results now. For the first question, which of the following surveillance technologies have you heard about? Folks have heard of a lot of technologies. And which of these technologies are you most interested in learning about? Folks are really interested in biometrics. Okay, so thank you for answering the poll questions. We're definitely going to discuss all of these technologies, and we will also have time for folks to ask more questions about them at the end. So thank you for participating. We will get to them and we will get to your questions. So please feel free to drop any questions you have in the Q&A box. But for right now, I want to share that this webinar and the Deadly Digital Wall report are part of a larger campaign that's targeting technology companies that are building the tools used to surveil, incarcerate, and deport our communities. It's been over 5 years since Mijente began to realize that our deportation defense work was impacted more and more by changes in technology. We realized that tech companies were creating the target lists and the digital tools for ICE to raid homes, workplaces, and communities. No Tech for ICE has exposed and organized, and in many cases won against the biometrics, data brokers, data analytics, and cloud systems behind these attacks on our communities. Together with students, workers, investors, and other advocates. So we're here today to discuss what this means for border communities and migrants at the border, but also to sound the alarm that this affects us all, even if we're miles and miles away from the border. We've already seen different technologies arriving at or being tested at the border being used throughout the entire country, throughout the world, including during and after last year's uprisings. So we invite you today to build together with us, to build power against this digital dragnet, because we do believe in a surveillance-free future. And so now I want to introduce you to Julie Mao, Deputy Director of Just Futures Law. After Julie, we will be hearing from Norma Herrera and also from Ramona Casas with the Rio Grande Valley No Border Wall Coalition. Julie, can you tell us more about the findings in the Deadly Digital Wall report?
Thanks so much, Cynthia, and good evening to everyone, or a little bit of afternoon for some on Pacific time, and just really want to uplift the other folks on this call, Mijente, the No Border Wall Coalition, for giving space to this conversation around the deadly digital border wall. You know, I definitely do not want to either overwhelm or scare ourselves and our own community around the types of harmful technology that I think we really go into in the report. So encourage folks to check out the report. I know folks just already chatted it in. So for the purposes of the little time that I have, I thought we'd go over some 3 main categories. Physical wall systems that sort of compose the most visible parts of the digital wall. Second, biometric systems, which I think there's a lot of interest in the webinar on that. And then thirdly, talking about the emerging technologies that are around phone and computer hacking, as well as car, vehicle navigation, and infotainment data tracking and collection. So thanks to the illustrators, particularly through Mijente, that kind of provided this visual depiction of some of the digital technology. So the first category really is around these surveillance towers, the aerial system that it connects to with the drones, and then video and vehicular surveillance with automated license plate readers. So what are surveillance towers? There's a lot of little images in this slide around integrated fixed towers, autonomous surveillance towers, remote video surveillance systems, or mobile surveillance systems. Basically, these are all types of video or fixed surveillance tower systems that track individuals, whether it be humans or animals or any type of movement across miles and miles of territory in which it is placed. And just to give some historical context, these technologies don't come from nowhere, right? They didn't get created for our US border. This is originally military technology that was first deployed in the theater of war in Vietnam to track and actually kill Northern Vietnamese individuals. That originally started with some of the fixed surveillance tower technology. And then, throughout the decades, that system got developed even more by companies like Elbit, which has the hundreds of millions dollar contract with CBP right now for these fixed surveillance towers, which are, hundreds of feet tall. And these technologies, again, were honed on other individuals globally. For example, Elbit, which is an Israeli company, actually developed and tested their surveillance technology on Palestinians in Israel's building of the wall in the West Bank. And now I included another statistical sort of rundown of how many of these systems we have, but these Elbit systems are literally now being tested on border communities, including indigenous communities in Arizona, including 55 towers along the Arizona border. And I just put here a large rundown of other systems that are within the southern and northern border region, including video surveillance systems, more than 300 in the southern northern border areas, more than 165 mobile video surveillance systems are being planned in Texas alone. This means CBP basically driving around pickup trucks. So for folks who live in the West Texas and RGV area, you might be seeing this already, having sort of these surveillance towers and video systems on the back of pickups, driving around town or in the borderlands. And then we don't know the exact numbers for the automated license plate readers. These are cameras that actually get affixed to, say, a border patrol agent's car that can take a picture of a person's vehicle license plate and then check who that individual is. We don't know how many they have, but we do know that they have a $54 million contract to purchase equipment just for these automated license plate readers themselves from Motorola Solutions. Now, I have rattled off a lot of technologies, but basically the takeaway is that CBP has put in place thousands of physical surveillance methods along with aerial methods like drones, and vehicular surveillance, right? Like these automated license plate readers, with the larger goal of building a real-time sort of mass surveillance system of people and communities in the southwest border region, with intentions of building that in the interior and the northern border. And this is really a reminder of the harm of border surveillance, right? It's not just the overwhelming sort of technical invasive technologies that are happening, but at the end of the day, we also have to ground that the terrain and lands, often indigenous lands, that CBP is placing this technology on is some of the most remote and hostile places along the border, and the location where hundreds of migrants die each year. And so this is also a reminder of the deadliness of this border surveillance. We actually have peer-reviewed research that has shown a significant correlation between these location of the border tech, the routes that migrants take, and the location of recovered remains of individuals who have died in these locations. So moving on, the next slide, biometrics. So biometrics technology has really expanded and boomed under the Biden administration, but it has been building since the time of Obama around the various types of, biometric personal features that DHS, including CBP, has been storing. And so the thing to know specifically with CBP is that through this E3 portal that they have, they are able to collect vast amounts of biometrics information on us. This includes, our iris prints, our facial prints for facial recognition, our voice prints to detect us based on when we speak, as well as most recently through the Biden administration, mass DNA collection, certainly at ports of entry at the southwest border. And then historically, I think this is the thing we're most familiar with, fingerprint type of biometrics collection. This collection has now become, one of the largest biometrics databases in the world. We are second in the US to only India in the amount of biometrics data that we are collecting at 260 million individuals. So how is CBP connecting and collecting all this information? We are talking about a vast range from BP checkpoints to border crossings, to airports, to seaports, to CBP holding centers or detention centers. And really the goal is to expand deeper into the US interior, as well as globally into homes, home countries or transit countries. So for example, right now, the Mexican immigration biometrics files are shareable with DHS and CBP. And then lastly, with the report, we go in really deep into CBP1, which is the new facial recognition asylum processing app that was rolled out in early spring and now operational at a lot of ports of entry at the southern border, including Texas ports of entry and Tijuana in Southern California port of entry. And I think we should really expect that CBP and other DHS agencies be rolling out more and more apps to sort of surveil and track immigrants. And I think this tech takeover of the immigration process is really accelerating under the Biden administration, and based on fundamentally flawed stereotypes around treating immigrants as threats that cannot be trusted, and that folks' lives have to be vetted through as much data as possible. And again, just as a reminder of the harm, right? What we're seeing in the biometrics area is that border communities and migrants are really the test subjects for surveillance, and a surveillance that has the threat and is already being rolled out in so many locations in the US, both because CBP expansively defines borders, right, as any location within 100 miles of the US land, border, or seaport. And we also know, as Cynthia mentioned, around drones being flown on Black Lives Matter protesters in 13 cities during the protest of the murder of George Floyd. These harms of border technology will disproportionately impact Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. Next slide, please. Okay, so my time is running short, so I just want to quickly mention this emerging area of technology around hacking and tracking. So CBP has been obtaining contracts with companies like Celebrite or Grayshift, a Chicago-based company that is able to hack into phones and computers without requiring a search warrant, And the scale of that has really grown the last couple of years, including a statistical example in 2019, CBP was able to search more than 40,000 electronic devices. We're also seeing CBP purchase large amounts of data around phone location, so that now if you're in a border community, CBP is able to target individuals and track how certain phones are moving within border communities. And then lastly, we are also seeing the emergence recently of contracts with companies like MSAB, who are able to hack into car infotainment and navigation systems and download that information. So we're talking about being able to surveil a whole, historical trail of a vehicle, as well as Bluetooth communications through the car that's stored. Next slide. And then lastly, I just want to remind everyone, this is an incredible amount of border technology, powerful surveillance tools that CBP has at its disposal. But at the end of the day, we as taxpayers and Congress are the ones that fund this technology. And so the digital wall is both a for-profit industry, right? The digital wall benefits not communities, but the military tech corporations that create and lobby for this technology to be bought. And so we can, as community, demand that this funding not be funded and actually invest in border communities. And with that, I will turn it over to Norma Herrera to talk about the real impact that they're seeing in communities on the ground.
Thank you so much, Julie. So hello, everyone. Buenas tardes a todos. I'm Norma Herrera. I'm an organizer with Voces Unidas and a member of the Rio Grande Valley No Border Wall Coalition, and I'm a member of Mijente as well. So today, I guess if we can just share my slides. Thank you so much. All right. So today I'll just start, I guess, by sharing some things that I think we all already know. And that is that physical border walls are wasteful, they're deadly, they're destructive, and they're completely ineffective at their, at what they're intended to do or what government officials say they're intended to do. And that Border Patrol and all Department of Homeland Security agencies systematically engage in violence against people who come to our country that are seeking safety and opportunity, as well as against the border communities who do the work of welcoming them with dignity and respect. So we know from our lived experience that these agencies have systemic violence and dysfunction at their core. They operate with impunity, and there never seem to be any consequences for the violence they bring on the people they interact with, whether that's a newcomer or a longtime resident. But we all know that, right? That's not exactly why we're here. We're here because President Biden and many Democrats, including many border members of Congress, believe that technology and surveillance are more humane alternatives to a physical wall, and that will somehow fix this broken dynamic and enable agents on the ground to behave in kinder, gentler ways toward migrants and border residents. If we can go to the next slide, please. But we know better than that, right? We know that it makes no difference if it's walls or surveillance towers and drones. If the goal is still to arrest, detain, expel, and deport people, then it's money wasted on a never-ending mission that has no oversight, no performance evaluation, and no appreciable impact on migration. So as Julie already mentioned, we know that Congress is considering giving the Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Protection billions of dollars more for border management through the infrastructure bill, which could mean a massive expansion of many of the technologies that Julie just talked about. and with no accountability mechanisms, right? Nothing to address the systemic failures and the abuses within these agencies. So to really stress the point, the idea of giving these guys more money, more tools, and very little to no strings attached is terrifying, because it's been our experience that even when there are strings attached, these agencies do what they want and they get away with it. So I can give you all just an example in the border wall context. CBP was supposed to consult with local communities and at the very minimum share maps, environmental reviews, planning documents, and then negotiate with local officials about where they would build the wall, right? That was actually written into an appropriations bill for the Department of Homeland Security. But after holding a few meetings with local officials, what we saw is that the federal government issued contracts to start building before these negotiations even ended, before they had even reached agreement with local officials. And that just rendered the input of the locals just completely meaningless to their decision making. So we know that unless Congress acts to significantly reduce funding and enforce meaningful oversight and community accountability, we can expect the same thing as CBP deploys tools and technologies that are designed to not only expand their reach, further embed them into our community, but also make them less perceptible and more challenging to identify and to hold accountable. Next slide, please. And I think it's important to mention too that both walls and surveillance technology require enforcement zones. So these are wide areas where the government clears the land, they build roads, they set up towers, they set up 24/7 lighting. So if this land is privately owned, then the government is engaging in a legal battle to take possession. And if the land is publicly owned, then it's most likely a protected habitat for endangered species or green space for recreation. So, regardless of the mechanism, border enforcement is a zero-sum game. So if the government gains a tactical advantage, we lose something. We lose, in some cases, our homes, nature reserves, privacy, equal protection under the law, or just simply safety and peace of mind. So I guess we have to remember what the end game is, right? CBP doesn't want towers, cameras, and drones to intercept migrants crossing dangerous terrain and give them water and shelter and bring them to safety. They want to intercept people so they can arrest them and expel them without due process. Tools that make CBP more effective at hunting people won't change anything about what they do to people once they find them. They will only increase arrests and deportations. They will only increase the violence. Next slide, please. So that brings me to my next point about the impact of these technologies. So for border residents, it means constant surveillance, violations of our privacy and civil liberties, and potentially more encounters with CBP. And for migrants, it means having to search for ever more remote and dangerous routes to avoid detection. As Julie already mentioned, you can see in the report that has been shown to increase deaths among border crossers. And none of this is to say that we aren't already experiencing surveillance in the region. So members of our coalition have found cameras on their properties placed there by CBP without their consent. It's common also to trip motion sensors while we're spending time in nature, anywhere in the vicinity of the Rio Grande, which of course trigger the presence of Border Patrol and lead to questioning and harassment. And we've all become familiar with aerostats, as mentioned in the chat a little while ago, surveillance blimps. They fly up to 5,000 feet above us, and they're equipped with radars and high resolution and infrared cameras. These blimps are actually Army surplus that were originally used for wars in Afghanistan and the Middle East, which just goes to show how CBP perceives the border region as a war zone in need of constant surveillance. Next slide, please. And so for folks who don't live along the border and they're wondering, how this affects you, how this affects me, it's important to remember that what's allowed to happen here at the border can spread to the interior, into the interior. And Cynthia mentioned this earlier, that we saw a couple of summers ago that CBP drones were deployed at Black Lives Matter protests across the country. And I was reading actually that the footage that was captured by those drones was then fed into a digital network managed by DHS that other federal agencies and local police departments have access to and they can use for other investigations. So the technologies we develop for immigration and border enforcement purposes, they have implications for criminal enforcement by other departments across the country. So to summarize, surveillance technologies, they're not here to save us. They're not here to make us safer. They're not here to change migration patterns or to cause Border Patrol to treat newcomers any more humanely. You know, to the extent that they further bloat and they equip agencies that already lack transparency and accountability, the digital wall just amounts to giving border and immigration enforcement agencies more tools that make them more effective at causing harm. So before we're done for today, and while we have you all here, I would love to just talk a little bit about the physical border wall, because yes, President Biden is building a physical wall in the Rio Grande Valley. But before I do that, I'm going to hand it over to Ramona Casas. She's a senior organizer with Arise Adelante. She's been working with low-income families here in the Valley for over 30 years. She's a member of our coalition and just generally a major driving force of the work to fight militarization here in the region. Adelante, Ramona.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ramona Casas, and I'm part of Arise Adelante and part of the No Wall Coalition. And one of the things that I want to share with you is my vision of an alternative vision that we have, that we can actually reinvest these funds that are being to continue to cause harm to whether it's physical or virtual. You can reinvest some of these funds into something more effective and more necessary that we have. Some funds that we have that the government has is just bad money spent badly. But us, like organizers in the border, we know that there's a lot of necessity in our region. I'm going to talk exclusively about the Valley in Rio Grande, and some of the necessities that I have are throughout the border, where the virtual and the physical wall is affecting. One of the things that we're seeing that they are this bad money is that our region, like a valley, is a very plain or even we get flooded with just a little bit of rain, and that is just a high risk. If we had a storm like we've had in the past, we're going to be completely flooded and it's going to cause a lot of damage. Or if we were to have a hurricane, a huge hurricane, it would cause a complete destruction of the area, because we, like as a region, we don't have an infrastructure that allows us to be prepared so that the water is actually draining to the Gulf. Actually, that invention is something that we need as a project, and it would need a lot of money, a lot of funds. This is where you can reinvest some of this money that is not being spent well, that is being used in the technologies and in the physical wall. Us also, as well as an area, the other problem that we have is a drainage problem. We're talking about the flooding in the drainage that is connecting the service to the houses. That one of Hidalgo County is one of the counties with more necessities in the rural colonies. That we have about 1,300 colonies, and the majority of our colonies that are rural, where Arise is serving most of its members, the organization that I belong to, we see that there's a lot of colonies within our county without public transportation, but also without lights. That there would be lights in the corners. The majority of the colonies are in the dark in the night. That's something that we see in other areas of other countries. No, we see it here in our country, in our colonies, in our rural colonies in the south of Texas. The other thing that we see is the necessity to, just as I was telling you before, is the public transportation. Like rural areas, we're very far away from the universities, from the colleges, local community colleges, where you actually go pay your utilities. because your rural colonies are on the outskirts of the city, away from the city. So it's very difficult for people to be able to go to the cities and make payments. And it's simple for us to have. We don't even have ways to get to recreational areas. The majority of families have one car that the head of household is taken away to go to work, and so our youth is struggling, not being able to access recreational areas, schools, and even libraries. There's a lot of necessities that we have in our colonies that for us it seems illogical that they're investing so much money in something that is so badly invested. So the other thing that we have on the border is a necessity that there are centers, welcoming centers, where we can treat people with humanity, with dignity, with respect, the recent arrival immigrants. We want to reinvest these funds so that we could have these welcome centers, and that we could that organizations like ours, like Arise and other ones, for example, like maybe Catholic Charities that has some of the centers in McAllen. This is the necessity that we have. We have 3 more centers in the entire frontier, in the entire border region, especially in the RVG, where we can like treat people with humanity and everybody that's coming out. So we want to reinvest these funds so that we can reinstate or restore some of the damage that has happened to our wildlife. A lot of our wild animals are are dying and damaged and are being damaged because the physical wall is happening. So there's a lot of repairs that we need, and we need to reinvest a lot of these funds, refocus away from the damages that's already been uh, some of the damages that are happening in some of the sacred areas in our area. So this vision that we have as like no border wall, it should be that there shouldn't be any more spending our money badly in such a ways like the virtual wall or the actual wall. So as I tell you, there's a lot of necessities that we need that are being badly spent. They're taking our money away from us. They need to stop and refocus, reinvest those funds. And now I will give to Norma.
So yeah, as I said earlier, President Biden is building border walls in the Valley. And so I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to invite you all to take action with us. You all might have heard that DHS intends to cancel border wall contracts in the Valley. But as I said, ongoing construction continues and many questions still remain. So the fight is not over. Voces Unidas and the Rio Grande Valley No Border Wall Coalition have joined a network of 62 organizations, indigenous groups, and community groups across the border that have sent Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas and Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland a letter urging them to stop ongoing construction. So, there's a list of demands, but first and foremost, we urge them to stop border wall construction and to engage in meaningful consultation with border communities to be transparent about their ongoing projects. They're actually not even acknowledging that they're building border walls. They're calling it levee repairs. And then also we want them to provide real opportunities for us to shape efforts within these agencies to remediate the harm that border walls have already caused. So check out the link in the chat to an online platform. It allows you to send your own letter, letting the administration know that you support our demands, as well as a toolkit to help us spread the word. We would really appreciate your support amplifying.
Thank you so much, Norma and Ramona. And I think we can all agree that, whether it's a physical or a digital wall, we are against walls. And so definitely encourage folks to be signing and supporting the asks of the No Border Wall Coalition. In terms of the digital wall, like I said before, with the numbers that I put on the screen, this is our taxpayer money. And so we can and should be asking your member of Congress to stop voting for this border tech money, right? Every year, Congress passes a budget for DHS. And so this should be part of the ask that no border tech money be put into the DHS budget. And then separately, I know there were a couple of questions in the chat around like the larger surveillance apparatus at DHS. And so the border digital wall, right, is part of a larger conversation that I think many of us are having around the DHS surveillance apparatus, including ICE, which is primarily responsible for the enforcement and sort of deportation surveillance apparatus in the interior of the US. And so for folks who want to learn more about that, as well as how these various technology companies are kind of weaving between CBP and ICE and local law enforcement to sort of create this collusion, we really encourage folks to join the No Tech for ICE campaign by texting tech to 40647. Again, text tech to 40647. And with that, I will turn it over actually to you all in the audience. We have, I think, maybe 5 or so minutes to ask any questions of us. So you can turn on and click the Q&A and ask your questions there.
Please let us know what questions you have. Feel free to drop your question in the Q&A box. We have talked about the larger No Tech for ICE campaign. We have talked about our new report, The Deadly Digital Border Wall, and we have talked about the incredible work that folks are doing in the Rio Grande Valley area to take this on and to challenge and to build power. And so please let us know what questions you have. As more questions come in, I'm seeing a question here that might be a question for our RGV friends. Julie Beer says, my husband and I used to love seeing birds in the McAllen and Harlingen area. Could we even enter Benson State Park and Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge now? Do they have walls now?
Thank you so much for your question. Yeah, actually, construction was ongoing before Biden took office near Santa Ana National Wildlife Refuge and Benson State Park. And while that was ongoing, I believe they did cut off access to Benson State Park. I think since President Biden came in, he did pause border wall construction across the border. But more recently, since July, earlier this year, we did start seeing new construction start back up. So that I was just answering the question in the chat about this, but that's happening in 4 different stretches of Hidalgo County here in the Valley. And the issue there is they claim that, these are levee border walls, which means it's essentially like cement. They dig open an earthen levee, a river flood control levee. They pour in cement and then they stack bollards on top. And so while construction was ongoing under President Trump and then stopped under President Biden, they left some levees halfway excavated. And so they needed to repair those. They repaired them. And then they just continued using the same excuse to continue building border walls in areas where levees had not been excavated. So they didn't need to do this. They're literally just lying to us, but this is not, it's happening close to the Benson State Park area, but not exactly inside the park. So hope that answers your question.
Thank you for the questions that are coming in. I have a question here that, Julie, I want to ask for your help with. How challenging is it to gather information about the companies using this technology and how they are using it, databases, etc.? So what went into putting together this report?
Yeah, I was just trying to type it in, but realizing I was giving such a long answer. So thanks for prompting. I think it's incredibly difficult. It requires a lot of heavy research up front. We're looking at a lot of government contracting, and also on the ground research, like talking to communities that are experiencing or don't know what they don't know about the technology. And I think it goes back to part of the larger historical problem with police surveillance, coupled with like historical racism and lack of accountability and violence at CBP. It's like the mix of the worst. That CBP doesn't disclose what tech they use and where they use it. And basically a lot of the oversight is rubber stamping the ex post, after the fact deployment of these technologies. So, we've been working with groups like No Border Wall Coalition around congressional fixes to try to force evaluation and public hearings before any type of technology is deployed or funded by Congress. But obviously we have a long hill to climb. But yeah, I think this is one of the huge challenges in this area.
Thank you, Julie. And Norma, can you tell us a little bit more about the levee repairs that are happening?
Yes, I'm happy to. Thank you so much. I was just looking for the question in the Q&A. I couldn't find it. So the question is just like, where is this happening? Or so there were 4 stretches along the levees in Hidalgo County in the Rio Grande Valley where during construction under the Trump administration, they had dug up levees. And so hurricane season was about to start earlier this year, and local officials started saying, well, we need to close them back up. We need to fill them back in. And so, CBP and contractors went in to fill them in. And they were done by the end of May. They were done just in time for hurricane season. But then they essentially started using the same justification to continue building more walls where there had been no, breached levees, where there were no compromised levees. And this is happening. There's one construction site in Dana, which is in Hidalgo County. There's another one close to Progreso, and there's another one close to Abram. The one closer to Mission and Abram is the one that's close to the Benson State Park and the National Butterfly Center as well. I believe that answers the question, but if there's any more, I'm happy to answer.
Mm-hmm. And as a follow-up, what would you say, how much awareness is there among folks who live along the border in terms of how expansive and intrusive this surveillance is? Is there a perception that when it comes to more police surveillance, that increased surveillance increases safety, or is there more skepticism?
I mean, I would say it's my experience that because we do interact with Border Patrol, CBP, ICE on a pretty regular basis, we have a pretty good understanding that these agencies have issues, systemic issues that aren't necessarily going to be fixed by giving them more tools. It's very, for example, when you're crossing the border, or when you're anywhere in the vicinity of the international boundary, it's very common to interact with Border Patrol. It's very common to get asked questions, to get harassed. There's members of our coalition that have actually had guns drawn at their faces. So because we've experienced that on a daily basis, I would say we're more skeptical than just, this is going to make things better. This is going to make treatment of migrants more humane. But I'd actually like to hand the question over to Ramona, because I wonder if she has any thoughts to share about that.
There's still a lot of work to do to raise awareness. One of the things that I can tell you that I see that there's a connection with everything that is going on. In having this information, and having the license plates being read, knowing where people are at, tracking them. When the vaccines came out, people were making connections. They were saying the government has us really tracked. They want to inject a chip on us so that they can know where we're at, just like they know where we're at through our phones, with the cameras that they have at the wall. They're making the connections that it's all part of the same thing, that the vaccine was a chip that was going to be injected. Is because consciously or unconsciously, we know that we are being intimidated and observed by technology bigger than what we imagine or understand. A lot of people don't want to vaccinate. get the vaccine because they think it's a chip to identify and track them where they're at, where they move, what we do, and all of that. It's a very big fear, and a lot of people have died because of this. I see here a lot of need to raise awareness and to help our communities to really understand all of this cause and effect that and the different ways that the government has of really intimidating us and to really get data from us as human beings. I feel that they look at us as little animals who they can observe through how do you say, binoculars, or those little that equipment that you use that you can really track people. That's how I feel that the system works, and that is being used at the border. And a lot of communities know, but they don't really understand how to talk about it, how to explain it. And sometimes I also feel that we have a lot of responsibility as Mijente, as a coalition, No Border One, and everyone who works to help our communities to understand what is going on and why are they doing that, and in what ways does it affect me.
Muchísimas gracias, Ramona. Thank you so
Thank you,
much,
Ramona.
Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us. Unfortunately, we can't get to all of your questions tonight, but you can feel 100% free to send your questions to our No Tech for ICE line. And you can do that by texting TECH, TECH, to 40647. And we will do our best, and we can try to get back to you later this week. And so I also want to say, if you are joining us tonight, this afternoon, and you are Latinx or Chicanx across the US or in Puerto Rico, and you share our pro Pueblo values, please consider becoming a Mijente member. We will drop that link in the chat so that we will drop the information for our text line in the chat again, but also we will drop a link to our Mijente memberships in the RGV area. To also make sure to follow the work of the No Border Wall Coalition, consider joining their efforts that are very much needed now and more than ever before. And so I want to say again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our speakers, Julie, Norma, and Ramona, for breaking down our new report, The Deadly Digital Border Wall. Make sure to follow Mijente, Just Futures, and the No Border Wall Coalition on social media for more updates. Thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon to join this virtual space with us to learn more about border surveillance and how it affects us all. Thank you so much and have a good rest of your afternoon.